Hi, everybody, and welcome to DRF TV's Stars and Stripes Saturday podcast from Belmont Park, presented by the New York Racing Association. I'm Dan Illman, joined by two sensational handicappers, DRF's NYRA analyst Mike Beer, Timeform US analyst, NYRA morning line maker, and all-around NYRA expert, David Aragona. And we're going to talk about Saturday's card at beautiful Belmont Park. Of course, we've got the Belmont Derby, the Belmont Oaks, but there are several stakes races to discuss, and we'll primarily talk about the 5 stakes races on the card, the major ones. And if the guys have anything else on the card they'd like to discuss, we can talk about that at the very end of the podcast. Let's begin, however, with race number 6, and it's the Grade 3 Dwyer. And this year the Dwyer is run at a 1-turn mile for 3-year-olds. And David, you made Code of Honor 4 to 5 on the morning line, and understandably so. We all saw how game he was in the Kentucky Derby, but I'm interested in your overall thoughts of Code of Honor. He got a nice setup in the Fountain of Youth. The trip certainly worked out for him in the Kentucky Derby, and he was pace compromised in the Florida Derby. Do you think this cutback is what he's looking for? Because he ran so well in the Champaign. I wonder if the 1.25 miles was a little taxing for him in the Derby.
I've got to say, I was actually pretty surprised by his good effort in the Kentucky Derby because I never really thought this was a 1.25 mile horse. I think the fact that he ran so well that day is just a testament to how well he's developed for Shug McGahee and how the good form that he's in right now. He might just be better than this field. And as you were suggesting, I do like him turning back to this 1 mile distance. I think that's really the ideal trip for him. The thing about this race, though, is there are a ton of really competitive, complex races in this pick 5 sequence and all these stakes races on Saturday at Belmont Park. And I feel like this is a spot where a lot of people are going to try to single, try to narrow this race down, because at first glance, it seems like a pretty straightforward affair. But there are some ways to go in this race. There are some alternatives to Code of Honor. I think Code of Honor is the most likely winner. If he's going to be around that 4 to 5 price, I do think that's a little low because there are some talented runners in this race. Rowayton is a horse that I'm not sure what to do with. I think he's certainly talented enough to win a race like this. I'm just not totally convinced that he is a miler type. He's got a ton of speed. We saw that as a 2-year-old. He's just wickedly fast early. They got him to rate last time, so it's a testament to his connections that they actually got him to turn off in the early going and use that speed that he has at the end of a race. Still, though, I'm not sure that stamina is really an asset for him, so I'm a little bit concerned that he's not going to get the mile distance. I don't know what to do with Mijos. He's a horse that I've never been a huge fan of. That Mucho Macho Man that he won, while it seemed impressive at the time, I'm not sure how strong that race has been in retrospect. I ultimately landed on Final Jeopardy in this race just because I think there are about 4 horses that can win this race, and he's going to be the biggest price of them. I've kind of had a thing for this horse for a little while. He has had excuses, though, in his 2 prior graded stakes tries. He just got totally eliminated at the start in that Wood Memorial. I mean, there was just that traffic jam coming out of the gate, and while some others took worse trouble, I mean, he was just really steadied out to the back of the pack and just never had a chance to make a run after that. And then last time out in the Peter Pan, he didn't run great, but if you watch that race, he was just really green, much greener than I'd ever seen him before. He was reacting badly to the whip. He was just kind of veering left and right, coming off the far turn and into the stretch. I don't know if maybe Irad Ortiz is going to use the whip differently this time or if they've made some adjustments since then. But I think what might really work for this horse is turning back to a mile, because I really liked that optional claiming score 3 back at Gulfstream, and that's been a strong race. Baracho, who was second, came back to do well in subsequent starts. That was a fast race. And I just think Final Jeopardy, he's a better horse than the last 2 efforts make it seem like, and he might get somewhat ignored in this race. Jason Service, he can wake up horses like this, and I think he might get a good effort out of this horse on Saturday.
Yeah, I think I share a lot of the same opinions David does. I'm not way against Code of Honor. Not that I feel like this is a race he has to win. I do think going shorter is fine for him, though. For the most part, his races are good. I don't think they're great, but they're good. And he is the horse to beat in here, a horse that I want to use. But it's not the kind of race where I feel like you can't take shots against him. Rowayton, I feel exactly the same way about Rowayton, David, that I struggled a little bit with him. I thought maybe that he would wind up being my pick in the race. I thought he ran well last time. He did get a perfect trip in that race, but it was nice to see him, take back off the pace, make a run up the inside. The horse that he ran down, Payne's a pretty nice older horse. So, Rowayton ran legitimately well last time. I thought maybe I would pick him, but I ultimately went to Mijos. I think I like him a little bit more than David does. I thought each of his first 2 career starts were really good. They, to me, showed him to be a very talented younger horse. His Mucho Macho Man, maybe the form hasn't panned out, but and it was a close finish at the end. But to me, he won that race a lot easier than the neck margin would suggest. I thought he had a pretty tough trip in that race. He got carried very wide in that race early. He was about 5 wide around the turn in that race, which is almost never a good thing at Gulfstream Park. But he still came home game to close that race down. I really thought he ran well in there. I don't care about the holy ball. I don't think he's a 2-turn kind of horse. It's just a question with him of what you're going to get off the long layoff here, because I guess he got sick a couple times after that race. So we'll see what kind of form he's in. It seems like he's training well, though. I think if he runs his best race, he can go with these horses. And I thought he'd be a price in this race. So I liked him, and I agree with David on Final Jeopardy. I think turning back is what he really wants. I don't know how good this horse is, but I think going shorter is just way better for this horse. I will try and beat Code of Honor, but I'll use him in the multis.
Code of Honor looks like the horse to beat, but we might be able to start off this sequence with some prices. David is going to go with the 5 Final Jeopardy for Jason Service. Mike takes a shot with the 1 Mijos for Jimmy Jerkins. And if you happen to get knocked out of the NYRA Bets Late Pick 5, well, there's a pick 4, and it starts with a sensational race, the Belmont Oaks Invitational. It's 1.25 miles for 3-year-old fillies based all across the globe, from France, from Ireland, from Japan, and of course from the United States. And really, Mike, the most polarizing horse in the race, and I never thought I would say this, or at least I never thought I would say it during her 2-year-old campaign, is the number 2 Newspaper of Record, who is as brilliant a juvenile filly turf horse as we've seen in a long, long time. And we look at her record this year, and she's 0 for 2, and all of a sudden she has something to prove.
Yeah, a lot to prove. I don't know what to say about her, really, but she is the sort of starting off point for the race, because you have to decide what you want to do with her before you move on. She was, to me, maybe the most exciting horse coming back to the races this year. And so far, things just haven't gone well for her. After the Edgewood, when she got run down by Concrete Rose, I don't know. I felt like there was nothing wrong with that. She looked a little bit headstrong, as is her wont in that race. Got overpowered in the stretch. I didn't think it was terrible. It was disappointing, to be sure. I didn't think it was terrible. I do think her Wonder Again was terrible, though. So that has me concerned about her. She just got away with a very easy pace last time. She looked like she was still going strong in the stretch, and for whatever reason, she didn't finish the race off. The 2-year-old New York Newspaper of Record finishes that race off. And now she's got to stretch out to 1.25 miles. We'll see what happens. I know that there's been some talk, at least from her connections, that they want to get her covered up and take her off the pace this time. I can't see how that's going to work out for her. If she was mine, I would just tell Irad to go and not even take too big a hold of her and just see what happens. But, the 1.25 miles is a question either way. I don't want to just totally dismiss her, because I know that, as good as she was as a 2-year-old, she could certainly beat a field like this if she somehow turns it around. But I don't have any confidence in her at all right now. So we'll see what happens. I'm definitely going to take a shot against her. And here are the 2 horses that beat her in her 2 starts this year. They're fine to me. Concrete Rose and Cambier Park. I can't say I'm a huge fan of either one of theirs, but they've done nothing wrong. I guess they're perhaps the 2 likeliest candidates to win this race if Newspaper Record can't find herself again. I'm not a big fan of either one of those 2 horses. I'm going to take €2 to try and beat this field. I like the 1, Olendan. This horse has just improved from race to race. She has taken on more distance this year, and she's handled it. Her race off the layoff at Longchamp, I thought was a pretty good performance in there. She finished gamely in there, couldn't really get up, and there was a good pace in front of her that day, but I thought she ran well. She won her next start at 1.1 miles. She ran really well in a grade 1 last time at 1.25 miles. The filly that won that race looks pretty good. She was undefeated at that time. She did lose as the favorite in the French Oaks, but that filly looks okay to me. And I just thought this horse could get a good trip from the rail. And there are just so many question marks in this race as far as the American horses go that I'm just, happy to take a shot with a horse like her. Really good trainer. I like that they reached out for a local rider. She should get a good trip from the rail. I like her. And, I'll use Just Wonderful with her, even though she has a little bit of the newspaper of record thing going on. A good 2-year-old. I thought she ran fine in the Breeders' Cup. She was never going to beat newspaper of record, but I thought she ran fine that day, and she hasn't come back as good at 3. But I thought her English 1,000 Guineas was good. Not great, but I thought it was good. It showed to me at least that she still had something. She was running at the end of that race. Terrible in her last 2 starts. I don't know what to say about those two, but I do think that, she's a horse who has a good race in her, and she's really bred to go this far. I mean, she's all distance on the bottom. This is the first time they're stretching her out, and this is supposed to be what she wants to do. So I'll give her a chance to turn it around here and take a step forward in this race. I'm mostly 1-6 with the other 3 horses I already mentioned, sort of backups for me.
So I'm kind of on a totally different page in this race than Mike is. I'll start with the American horses, I guess. So I landed on newspaper of record, which I was kind of surprised about. I didn't think I would pick her in this race, but just going through this field, I couldn't latch on to anybody else as an alternative. And at the end of the day, newspaper of record is better than these horses. I firmly believe that. The question is whether or not they can get her to settle enough to run one of her good races. Maybe she's not the same horse anymore. Maybe she didn't go on as from 2 to 3 and others have. I don't totally buy that yet. I don't think we've seen the evidence of that yet. She actually reminds me a lot of Analyze It last year in the Belmont Derby. He looked so good early on, came back, lost a couple races coming into the Belmont Derby. And I think a lot of people were just dismissing him coming into that race. And he was a very lukewarm favorite there. And he almost won that race. Chad Brown's generally right about these horses. I mean, maybe he just has to run her in this spot because there's no other option. But I wouldn't be shocked if she gets the 10 furlongs as long as she settles. The question for her is the trip, and I know they're pretty adamant about getting her off the pace in this race, and I think there will be an opportunity to do it, because when you look through this field, the number 7 horse, Jody, the Japanese filly, if you watch her races in Japan, she is a one-dimensional front runner. She is going to the front in all likelihood. Maybe newspaper of record just is unrateable, and Irad Ortiz won't be able to get her back behind that horse. But I think that will be the plan. And also, I wonder if Cafe Americano is in this race to serve as some sort of a pace setter, because I know she was kind of a late addition to this race, and it's a little curious that Chad Brown's running a horse like her in this race when he's got so many other good horses out there that seemingly have better credentials to run in this race than she does. So I wonder if there's a little bit of planning involved in that. If newspaper of record settles, I think she's going to win this race. That's a big if, though. Watch the early portion of this race. What you want to look for is if Irad Ortiz's hands are disconnected from her neck, if he's back in the saddle and pulling on the reins, that's a really bad sign. That's what's happened at each of her last 2 starts, and she's had no finish left. But if she can somehow relax a little bit, I think she can win this race. And watching some of her recent workouts, she's looked like she's settling a little bit better. She really outfinished Cambier Park very well in their most recent workout, kind of drawing away from her at the end. So I put her on top, not because I think she's going to be great value or anything like that. Just thinking about this race from a multi-race perspective and playing like a pick 5 or pick 4 wager, she is where I want to lean in this race, because I don't think any of the others are horses that I want to put on the same tier as her. As for the others, the other American horses, I'm not a big Concrete Rose fan. Frankly, of all of the top American horses, newspaper of record, Concrete Rose, and Cambier Park, I'm almost most worried about Concrete Rose getting the 10 furlong distance, because there's a lot of sprint pedigree on the dam side of her breeding. And I know she was drawing off impressively at the end of the Edgewood last time, but I think a lot of that was due to newspaper of record just shutting down at the end of that race. And it was a bit of an optical illusion because they weren't coming home that fast. So I respect Concrete Rose, and I think she's really taken a step forward. I was just a little bit against her. Cambier Park is the one I'm least worried about getting the distance, because she's out of that good damn Sealy Hill, who was probably best going 1.25 miles on the turf. And Cambier Park just seems like she's successively stepping forward with every start. She doesn't have the same turn of foot as the others, but she's a grinding type that I think is going to be around at the end of this race. As for the Euros, I wanted to like them more than I ultimately did. I kind of had the opposite take on Olendon that Mike did. That Prix Saint Allery last time was that's not really a Group One race. I mean, if you look at the horses in there, Ciara Athena, I know she was impressive winning, but she came back and was kind of exposed in the French Oaks. And the third place finisher, who Olandon barely got past, I mean, she came back and was only third in a Group 3 race next time. So I'm just not sure that the form of that race is really quite as good as it looks. And it only got a time form rating of 101, which is nowhere near what great Group 1 horses should be running. So I'm just not sure that she's really as good as she looks. I haven't been thrilled with her races, having watched them. And the two Aidan O'Brien horses, I mean, Coral Beach seems kind of hard to make, and Just Wonderful, I don't know, maybe the distance helps her. I agree with what Mike said about the pedigree, but I know Athena won this race last year. I'm always skeptical of Aidan O'Brien bringing the fillies over to the U.S., though, because if you look in Formulator, with female horses that he runs in the United States, he's just 2 for 39 over the past 5 years. It seems like he's just taking a shot with a lot of these horses to get them some black type, and it's not quite as intentional placement as he does with the Colts. So I don't know. Just Wonderful is not going to shock me, but I didn't love her. So from a multi-race perspective, I would lean on Newspaper of Record and use the others as backups. Cambier Park would be my second pick in this race. I just didn't have a really strong opinion, so I'm just going to lean on the horse that I think is the best horse.
And the good news for David is that Newspaper of Record, with all of her merits on her page and all of the talent she's shown throughout her career, will likely be the best price, at least on the win end and certainly in the multis, than she's ever been in her entire career. Mike likes the French filly Olandon, as well as Aidan O'Brien's Just Wonderful in the Belmont Oaks. We have another pick 4, beginning with race number 8. This is truly the late pick 4, and it's the grade 2 John A. Nerud going 7 furlongs. $300,000 is the purse. And David, the number 9 promise is fulfilled. You made the 2-1 morning line favorite. He was certainly one of the better 3-year-old dirt sprinters of 2018. And I think you can make a case that he has some excuses this year in the Dubai Golden Shaheen. That was a tough spot off of the long layoff. And when he didn't break, his best asset was taken away from him. I guess the Churchill Downs Stakes, you could say, was a little disappointing until you realize you ran against the freakishly fast Matoli. And last time out, he never really got close to the rail on a day where you had to be inside.
Yeah, if there's one horse in this sequence that I really want to lean on, it's Promises Fulfilled. I just think he fits this race so well. And I agree with what you were saying. He's had real excuses this year. I know he's lost 3 races and he's lost 4 in a row going back to the Breeders' Cup last year, but he's actually run well in all of them. He ran well in that Golden Shaheen after breaking slowly. The Churchill Downs race, Matoli's just so good. And I love the race he ran in the Met Mile last time. In my opinion, that's one of his best efforts yet because he doesn't really want to go a mile. He was 3 wide the entire way over a track where you didn't want to be that far out. You really wanted to be in the 1 path or perhaps the 2 path. But his trip, he was definitely compromised by his wide trip in that race, and he stayed on pretty well, all things considered. And I'm not going to be shocked at all when he gets back to the 107 buyer that he ran the Amsterdam last year, or the kind of race that he was running in the Alan Jerkins or the Phoenix. I just think he is way the horse to beat in this race. And this is one of those time form US pace projector races where if you look at the pace projector, he's out in front with that the blue bar favoring horses on or near the lead. I think he's faster than a horse like Killybegg's Captain. You go through the rest of this field, there's just not a ton of speed in this race. In my opinion, there's just not enough speed to bring the other horses into this race who probably aren't even as good as Promises Fulfilled. So if I can get that 2-1 on Promises Fulfilled, I actually think that's value on him because he should probably be lower than that in my opinion. As for the others, Dwyer at his best is the second most talented horse in this race. I just don't trust him at all. He was really good in that Tom Fool 2 back. His Churchill Downs Stakes was okay. It wasn't great. Even though the pace looks fast, it wasn't a race that really played to horses coming from way out of it for whatever reason. He was a late vet scratch at the gate when he was entered for the True North last time. I don't know what that was about, but that's never a good sign. And he's just a horse that's somewhat inconsistent. He used to be really consistent for Linda Rice, but Mike Maker's only gotten that one really good effort out of him. And I'm not thrilled with his other races for the new trainer. So I didn't know what to do with him. Ultimately, he's not going to get the right pace scenario, so I was a little bit against him. I have the utmost respect for Pat on the Back. I think he's a really cool horse. I don't know if he's good enough to win this race, but he could get a little bit ignored in this spot. He always runs well. I think he's probably going to finish in the money somewhere. And Nicodemus is a horse that's a little interesting to me. I don't know if he's good enough to win the race, but I think 7 furlongs is a better distance for him than 6.5 last time. I know it's just a half furlong distance, but he just never seemed comfortable with the pace last time. He was really under a ride for a lot of the way to keep up, and he was still finishing best of all at the end of that race. So I think he can do a little better this time. I'm just not sure he's good enough to be Promises Fulfilled. I think Promises Fulfilled is going to be really tough to beat in this John Nerud.
Yeah, I agree. I'm only 4 and 9 in this race. Promises Fulfilled's way the horse to beat. I'm not, to me, it's all about the pace with him. There's just really no speed in here. To me, his 3 races since the Breeders' Cup are not that good. I think he ran fine in the Met Mile last time. His first 2 starts back off the layoff. I know one of them was in Dubai, and he didn't break great in there, but he didn't run well in that race. And, his Churchill race I thought was fine. But if he gets back to his best race and they just send him to the front in here, I think he's going to be really hard to beat. And the only other horse I wanted in the race was Nicodemus. Not because I think he's definitely good enough to win, just because I feel like he is a horse who's continuing to head the right way for Linda Rice. And this is just a better distance for him. I know it's only half a furlong, but he needs a little more ground than a true, 6 or 6.5 race. He was running at the end of that race last time, and it was not a race where you wanted to be trying to close too much ground, I didn't think. His races overall are pretty good. They're not good enough to beat Promises Fulfilled, but they're pretty good and they're getting closer. I thought he could be the one to take a step forward in here. I didn't really like anybody else in here, just the 4 and the 9.
Just seems like the class drop for Promises Fulfilled is very good for him. As David and Mike say, he is the horse to beat. He's a horse they'll both be using. Mike's also a little bit interested in Nicodemus. I think he is a bit upwardly mobile. We're going to move on to race number 9. It's the Grade 1 Belmont Derby. It's 1.25 miles for $1 million, and it's one of the best betting races you're going to see. Just a full field of evenly matched, talented 3-year-olds. And Mike, let's talk about the morning line favorite. And David, I'm sure you had a whale of a time making the line for this race. The 13 Digital Age is 9-2 on the line, a perfect 3 for 3 for who else? Chad Brown. He beat 3 of these common foes last time out in the American Turf. He also beat Avies Flatter, who came back to run second in the prestigious Queen's Plate. Digital Age is doubtlessly a talented horse. When I see the sire Invisible Spirit in my past performances, however, I always get a little bit concerned about distance, and Digital Age is going to race beyond 1 mile and a 16th for the first time in his career on Saturday.
Yeah, distance really is the big question for him, because I don't really think there's any way to knock his talent. He's one of 2 for Chad in here who comes in at 3 for 3. Digital Age, I liked his last race a lot. Once he got off to the outside in the stretch, he really came with a good finish in there to close that field down. I liked that performance. I liked his race 2 back. And obviously his career debut is one of those races that if you watched it, just looking at it on paper, it may not look that great, but if you watched it, you could tell that this horse just had a ton of talent and a ton of upside. We'll see what happens. I feel like he's the kind of horse, would I bet him as the favorite in here? No. I don't know if I would bet anybody as the favorite in here. That was kind of a wide open race. I could use him in this race. I don't love him, but I could use him for sure. I actually went with one of Chad's other horses on top with the 12, de Marchillet. They have a lot in common, these 2 horses. I just feel like, de Marchillet seems way more likely to handle the stretch out and distance. And listen, I just like all 3 of his races. I think he's run really, really well in all of them. Post 12 is no bargain. But his Pennine Ridge, the local prep for this race, was a strong effort. He did get a good trip in that race, but he came to the outside, powered by that field, ran right through a bump in mid-stretch. It didn't stop him at all. I thought he ran well in there. And I'm actually just going back, for the most part, the 2 horses I wound up being most interested in are the horses that ran 1-2 in that race, because I also want to use Seismic Wave, who's just, they wrote him very conservatively in the Pennine Ridge. It almost, it's the local prep for this, and it's almost like they were using it as a prep. They just took him back to last. Rosario didn't even take him off a cover until they got into the stretch, and he was running at the end. He seems like he's perfectly built for a race like this. More distance, probably better for him. He's run well in all of his races anyway. He just fits really well in this field. If he can get a trip, as a closer in a 14-horse field, he is going to need to get the right kind of trip in the race. But I liked those two horses more than anybody else, but it was pretty close. I mean, I just felt like there were a lot of different ways to go. And those are the two horses that I settled on, just because the other ones I just had way more questions about as far as either distance or whether they were, quite this good. I think there are some horses who have some talent, but may not quite be this good. And the European horses, they just didn't really do anything for me. I don't like Master Fencer. I don't know why anybody, likes that horse. And Cape of Good Hope, maybe he's the Euro that I use. He's got he's the bred to go long. As soon as they stretched him out this year, he did improve. His last race isn't a good one, but it was soft ground and he was closer to the pace than usual. Maybe it's an excuse. I can't say I love that horse, but if he gets firm turf, he's a horse that I want to be using in this race.
Yeah, so I've got similar feelings that Mike does about the American horses. I guess I slightly prefer Digital Age of the three horses that are going to take the most money, I would assume. I like his races a lot. The American Turf last time, I was really impressed by that late kick that he put in. I know there's some question about the distance. I don't know. I'm not considering that too much. I feel like he's going to handle it. Chad Brown, he generally gets these horses to go this far. And the kind of style that he has coming from off the pace with that late kick, I feel like it doesn't matter as much, especially on a really firm turf course like we're probably going to see on Saturday. So that's not something I'm factoring in too much. I just think there's a chance Digital Age is maybe the best horse in this race, though it's very close. He's got to work out a trip, though. Chad Brown's runners got really unlucky with the post draws. His three shortest price runners are all the three outside post positions. So I like Digital Age. I just don't want to put him on top because he might be the favorite in this race. DeMarchelier is a tough horse for me because I like his races. He's not the flashiest horse. He just kind of gets it done. He ran better than I expected him to in the Pennine Ridge last time. I liked him a little bit in that race, but he really took it over at the 8th pole and was game to hold off Seismic Wave late. Seismic Wave is coming with a full head of steam, and DeMarchelier really dug in as they got to the wire. He's a nice horse. I have no doubt about him getting the distance. He just doesn't seem to have the same turn of foot as some of the others, and I wonder if that'll be a slight problem in a field as big as this, because all of these horses have to work out trips, and you've got to make your way through some tight holes at certain points. So we'll find out. I like him, though. I won't be surprised if he wins this race. In some ways, I guess Seismic Wave is the one that should appreciate the stretch out to 10 furlongs the most of these three, because he's got a ton of stamina breeding on the dam side. He's a half to Teletext to a second in the Prix Niel in France, which is a mile and a half race. He just comes from so far out of it. It seems like the only option is to go right to the back of the pack with him and try to pass everybody. I don't think they're going to change that game plan this time. If anybody can do it, it's Joel Rosario, because he's been riding great and he's so good on these closers. He's just going to have a lot of work to do. I think he's talented enough to do it, but everything needs to go right for him. I'm using all of these horses. They're my second, third, and fourth picks. I really am kind of pro the American horses in this race, but I did pick one of the Euros on top. I put Cape of Good Hope as my first pick. I guess I don't love him. I just think he's probably going to be a decent price in this race. I think he's a little better than he looks. That French Derby 2-back was a really good effort. That felt like a pretty strong race where there was some gaps between the horses ahead of him. It feels like the winner really ran that day, and the runner-up Persian King was a highly touted horse going into there. He finished well ahead of Rock Emperor, the horse that's since been transferred to Chad Brown, who's drawn on the outside in this race, and he was really finishing better than that horse. I think it was just the soft turf last time in the Hampton Court. If you watch that race, it looks for a while like he's going to run a big race, because he burst through a hole and for a minute looks like he's going to finish in the money, and they just kind of can't sustain that momentum and really tires at the end. He really tied up badly at the end of that race and just looked to me like a horse that wasn't getting over the ground late, and it really tired him out. So I'm not going to be shocked if he runs a lot better getting on the firm turf here. He's a full brother to Highland Real, so if anything, you might want to go farther than this. I'm hoping he can find some of that horse's early speed, because he will be well served to be forwardly placed in this race, because there are a lot of horses that want to be closing from way back in here, which makes me concerned about the trips for some of the more highly regarded American horses. But I just think Cape of Good Hope is going to be in that 8 to 10 to 1 range, and at that price, I'll put him on top. As for the others, it's kind of a gap back to them for me. Rock Emperor doesn't do a whole lot for me. His races prior to that Prix de Jockey Club are just okay. He didn't run great in that race. Social paranoia, I think in terms of raw talent, he's nearly on par with horses like DeMarchelier and Digital Age. I don't think he's going to be helped by the stretch out to 10 furlongs. So I'm a little against him, even though he does have early speed, and that could be an advantage. I'm just going to go with Cape of Good Hope and take a shot with a horse that I think will offer some value.
Fantastic race, probably a spread race in any kind of multi-race wager like this. All stakes late pick 5, and David's going to go with Cape of Good Hope, the full brother to Highland Reel, Breeders' Cup Turf winner, $10 million in lifetime earnings. He'll use horses like DeMarchelier. He'll use horses like Seismic Wave and Digital Age. Mike's top 3 picks in Saturday's DRF. The analyst goes with DeMarchelier, Seismic Wave, Cape of Good Hope, but it should be a sensational show. Race number 10 is the Grade 2 Suburban, and this race has just been such an historically important race for NYRA over the years. They're going the classic distance of 1.25 miles. $700,000 is the purse. And David, Catholic Boy, is back. This horse, of course, won the Belmont Derby last year on the Stars and Stripes Racing Festival. He won the Travers. He's won the Remsen. He seems equally good on dirt and turf. He got a nice starting off point in the Grade 2 Dixie on the Preakness undercard. And every time they go turf to dirt with this horse, he fires, and he does have that good early speed that will put him in the mix.
Yeah, I like his early speed in this race, especially breaking from the rail, going this odd configuration at Belmont Park where they break in the middle of the turn. Being inside is never a bad place to be going that distance. He's the horse to beat in this race for sure. He deserves to be a pretty strong favorite. He's a horse that I feel like a lot of people are overrating a little bit because we don't yet know if he's really as good as some of the other handicap horses out there. He deserves all due credit for his versatility because you rarely see horses at this elite level who are equally as good on dirt and turf, and it's really cool that he's able to do that. But I think because he's able to do that, people are just mistaking him for a better horse than he's shown himself to be so far. He ran well in the Travers last year, and if he runs that kind of speed figure again, he is the most likely winner of this race. But let's remember who he was beating in the Travers. It wasn't the strongest group at that time of year. The favorite in that race, Good Magic, didn't show up. Gronkowski didn't show up. It was, in retrospect, not the toughest field. He didn't show up in the Breeders' Cup Classic, Catholic Boy. He just didn't run his race for whatever reason that day, even though he's a horse who usually does. I thought his return to the Dixie last time was fine. He's going to appreciate getting back out to the 10 furlongs because stamina is his greatest asset. I just feel like looking at the speed figures of this race, especially looking at the time from US speed figures, he really doesn't have an edge on this field. And he's going to have to probably run maybe the best dirt race of his life to beat these. And at a short price, I just don't want to take him or lean too heavily on him. He might even drift down off that 9-5 because it seems like a lot of people are anointing him as one of the best handicap horses out there already. And I'm just not totally convinced yet. The trouble with this race is there's no clear alternative once you get to the rest of the field. I don't particularly like the horses coming out of the Brooklyn, Rocketry or Marconi. Marconi got pretty lucky to win that race. Rocketry had a tougher trip, but Rocketry is also a horse that I don't think wants to go as short as 10 furlongs. I think he needs way more ground than that, and there's just not enough speed for him to close into. Pavel is a horse that certainly has a race in him that can win this. I've never loved him going 10 furlongs, though. It's a tough post position. He had a tough trip in the Metropolitan Mile last time. He just had no chance in that race given the way it's set up and where he was on the track. But he's still a horse that I don't totally trust, even though I know he can win this race potentially and he'll be a price. I put Preservationist on top. I don't know for certain that Preservationist is good enough to win this race, but I like the way he's coming into this race. This horse has always had a ton of talent. It's tough to take these lightly raced 6-year-olds because you know that he's had a ton of physical setbacks with all these stops and starts in his career, but he's always been really good. And when he does show up on the track, he almost always runs well. And the other thing about him is he really runs well second off a layoff. He's kind of this big, heavy, robust horse who sometimes takes some time to get fit. And when you look back in his past performances, he needs that first race back. And when he gets the second race off the layoff, he really takes a step forward. If he steps forward off his return race this time, he's probably going to beat this field because he ran really well in that May 23rd race. Previously, he's not been a horse that I think loves a wet track, especially a sloppy track. I don't think that's his preferred surface. But he showed a turn of foot that I'd never seen out of him last time, coming through on the inside. He beat Expert, who is a horse who's been in great form for Linda Rice recently. He's got to stretch out to the 1.25 miles, but he's certainly bred to do it on the dam side. There's a ton of stamina breeding in this pedigree, and I like the inside draw. I just think Preservationist is going to be a decent enough price that I can take a shot with him, because I do think Catholic Boy is going to be an underlay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a lot to add to this. Catholic Boy is the horse to beat in here. I don't think he's as good as a lot of people are sort of making him out to be. He certainly won some really nice races, that's for sure. But he doesn't tower over this field by any stretch. Maybe he's just found the right spot. The 1.25 miles is good for him. He's got a good post on the inside. And he's a horse who could very easily win, but I don't think he has to win. And he's the kind of horse I'm happy to take at least a small shot against. I put Preservationist second in my analysis. I like this horse. I really liked his return race. I know it was a sloppy track, but I really liked the way he ran that day. He looked really good winning. He's 3 for 3 routing in his career. He should be able to go this far. I just think he's really dangerous in here at what should be a fair price. I picked Pavel on top. I don't trust him, but he should be at the right price in this race. And, he's one of those horses, I can't figure out what they're thinking, the way they manage him and some of the races they run him in. But he has a lot of talent. And I just wonder if he's one of those horses who's never going to really get to show up because of the way he's been handled. And it's hard to, knock him too much. He's made $2 million on the track. But, he's 0 for 7 at this distance. And they just run him in, every impossible 1.25 mile race that there is in the world. This is not an impossible 1.25 mile race. He might be better going shorter, but he's run some good races going this far, including the Dubai World Cup 2 back. He did not run poorly in that race at all. He had an impossible trip last time and didn't run that badly at all in the Met Mile. I just feel like this is, maybe the first spot he's been in quite a while where he actually has a real chance to win, and he's going to be a fair price. And I'm going to take him and Preservationist and try and beat Catholic Boy.
Last time Pavel went second back from Dubai, pulled off the upset in the Grade 1 Stephen Foster. He's going to try to repeat that pattern on Saturday in the Suburban. The marquee name in this race is Catholic Boy. The gents are going to try to take shots against him. Mike with the 11 Pavel. He's also using David's top selection, the 2 Preservationist, and it's certainly nice to see that perseverance has paid off for Centennial Farms and Jimmy Jerkins. This is a 6-year-old Preservationist. This will only be his 8th lifetime start. He has obviously had his share of physical problems, but he's always had talent, and now he has a chance to strut his stuff on the big stage. So there is the late pick 5, or the all stakes pick 5 on Saturday on Stars and Stripes Racing Festival Saturday at Belmont. We got 6 others. I hate to put you guys on the spot, but Mike, give me one other spot play for the folks at home.
I don't know if there's anybody that I would push too hard. I thought the undercard on Saturday was, sort of less than interesting. The 5th race I thought is a very good race, but it's, a bunch of first-time starters. It's a 2-year-old turf sprint. There are some really nice pedigrees and some horses who could be okay in that race. So it's a good race to watch. I went with the only horse who has experience, Montauk Daddy, whose debut is actually pretty good on the main track, and that horse should handle the turf. So I picked that horse. That horse won't be a price. Maybe in the 2nd race, I'll take a shot with Southern Brigade, the number 9 off the layoff here, 3-year-old debut, a horse who's just getting the right drop in class. I don't know what kind of price that horse could be in that race, but I would take a shot with him, perhaps. There just really wasn't anybody that on the undercard that caught my attention.
Yeah, there were a few races on the undercard that I thought were interesting. Not that they're great races, but there were some vulnerable favorites, I think. The first race, I think 8 Oaks is going to be the favorite just because she's got a last out win in a race where a lot of others have really poor form. But if you remember the race that she won going back all the way a year, it was a 4-horse field that might have been one of the worst races I've ever seen run in the NYRA circuit. So I don't want any part of that horse. I think she's a trap in that race. if the track is fast tomorrow, I think Malibu Mischief is a horse you really want to pay attention to in the first race because she is faster than these horses in the early going, and she hates a sloppy sealed track or a muddy sealed track. She really just runs her only good races on harrowed going. So I think she's a horse you want to pay attention to also because she's getting a rider switch to Dylan Davis, and in her prior race off the layoff, Gary Contessa had put a rider on her who just doesn't really win races. So I think there's a lot more intention behind Malibu Mischief tomorrow, and she could just get in front of that field and get brave. So she's a horse I want to play in the opener. The second race to me is interesting because there are a lot of horses that are going to take money that I think are just running in the wrong spot. A lot of them don't want to go this far. I agree with Mike that Southern Brigade is the horse to beat. He just is very logical. But the horse that I want to take a shot with at a price in the second race is Golconda. He's got turf races going a route of ground that make him a big player in this race. And I think people are going to be turned off by his last race in that 41 Dwyer, which also got a pretty low time from US speed figure. I don't know what the deal is, or the time looks fine, but I think that's a race where the speed figures are going to be proven wrong over time. The winner, Opt, came back and ran 22 points higher in his next start. The fourth place finisher, Overlord, came back and ran 17 points higher at his next start. The number just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a lot of horses in that race. So I feel like that number is more like a 55, 56, and Golconda really did not take a step backwards at all. And now he's taking the drop from a maiden special weight down to a maiden claimer. I know he's had a lot of chances, but in terms of ability, I think he's one of the most talented horses in the race, and he might be a price. So he's a horse I definitely want to bet. And then in the fifth race that Mike was mentioning, I don't know if I'm going to write up this horse or not, but Percentage for Christophe Clement is a first-time starter I've been looking forward to seeing because he's been working in company with a few other horses that Christophe has debuted already who have run well, and he's been, I think, outworking them. And he's got plenty of turf pedigree. He's a half-brother of Fast Boat, who showed a lot of promise as a turf sprinter early in his career, as well as Utrecht, who won a race here, I think, last week, who is decent on the turf. So I think Percentage is a horse that just fits that race really well, and Christophe can win with a first-time starter.
Well, there you have it. Great card up, obviously, on Saturday at Belmont Park. 11 race card, 5 major stakes races, 1 Breeders' Cup win, and you're in. That's the John A. Nerud for the Breeders' Cup Sprint. 3-year-olds running in the Dwyer, and, of course, the main events, the Belmont Oaks, the Belmont Derby, and the Suburban, featuring Catholic Boy, last year's Travers winner. Thanks to Mike and David for their exceptional analysis. Thanks to the New York Racing Association for sponsoring this production. And special thanks to all of you for taking the time to listen to our podcast. Now go out there tomorrow, press your opinions, make some money, and make a score. Best of luck.